Let me tell you about Serena Cole, 41 years old, Senior Creative Director at Vantage Publishing Group, a mid-size media company in New York that produced educational content, professional training programs, and licensed curricula across 12 industry verticals. Serena had been at Vantage for 9 years. She had built the company's flagship professional development series from a single course into a 47-title library that was licensed to corporations, universities, and government agencies in 19 countries. She had written or co-written 31 of those 47 titles herself. She had developed the instructional framework that made the library consistent, scalable, and premium enough to command the licensing fees that had grown Vantage's recurring revenue from $4 million to $38 million annually during her tenure. She was, in every meaningful sense, the engine behind the product line that kept Vantage financially viable. She was also, for the 4th consecutive year, being told that there was no budget for raises. The economy, her manager said, margin pressure, competitive headwinds. All the language that companies use when they want to explain why the people who produce the results should accept less of them. Serena had listened to these explanations patiently for 4 years. In year 5 she hired an attorney. Not because she had a plan, because she had a question, a specific technical question about the terms of her original employment agreement, and a clause she had negotiated in year 1 when Vantage had been smaller, less successful, and more willing to offer creative terms to attract the talent they needed. The clause was a royalty provision. It stated that for any content Serena authored or co-authored during her employment, she was entitled to a royalty of 3.5% of net licensing revenue attributable to that content, paid quarterly, for the duration of the licensing period. Serena had negotiated it because she had come from a background in independent publishing where royalties were standard. Vantage's HR team at the time had agreed because the company was small, and the provision had seemed manageable. Nobody had mentioned it since. Nobody had paid it. Not once in 9 years. And when Serena's attorney, James Okafor, commissioned a forensic audit of Vantage's licensing revenue attributable to Serena's authored titles over the 9-year period, the number that came back was not what anyone at Vantage had prepared for: $40 million, in unpaid royalties, contractually owed, precisely calculable, legally enforceable. For 9 years of being told there was no budget for a raise, this is the story of how one creative director turned a neglected employment clause into the most expensive accounting oversight in Vantage Publishing Group's history. Buckle up. Because this royalty had been running for 9 years, and nobody at Vantage had noticed until it was $40 million too late. The story started in year 1. Serena had joined Vantage from a boutique independent publisher where she had spent 6 years developing educational content and receiving standard royalty payments on everything she created. When Vantage approached her, the base salary they offered was competitive but not exceptional. Serena had negotiated. She had asked for a royalty provision on authored content. Vantage's CEO at the time, a woman named Carol Marsh, who had since retired, had consulted with HR and agreed. The clause was written into Serena's employment agreement on page 4. Standard royalty language. 3.5% of net licensing revenue. Paid quarterly. Applicable to all content authored or co-authored during the employment term for the duration of the licensing period. Carol had signed it. Serena had signed it. HR had filed it. And then, as these things do in growing companies with overloaded administrative systems, it had been forgotten. Vantage grew. The content library expanded. Licensing revenue climbed year after year. Nobody in finance had set up a royalty tracking system for Serena, because nobody in finance knew the clause existed. Nobody in legal had flagged it because legal had turned over twice since the original agreement was signed. Nobody in HR remembered it because the HR director who had agreed to it had retired 2 years after Serena joined. Serena had mentioned the clause once, in year 3, in a conversation with her direct manager. Her manager had said he would look into it. He had not looked into it. Serena had documented the conversation. Then she had continued doing her job. Building the library, growing the revenue. Showing up every quarter to be told there was no budget for raises. In year 9, after the 4th consecutive raise denial, Serena had gone home one evening, opened her original employment agreement, and read page 4 again. Then she had called James Okafor. "James," she said, "I have a royalty clause in my employment agreement that I do not believe has ever been honored." James asked her to send the agreement. He called back the next morning. This clause is active, he said. It has been active since year 1. If Vantage has been generating licensing revenue from your authored content without paying quarterly royalties, they are in breach of contract for the entire period. How would we calculate what they owe? Serena asked. We commission a forensic audit, James said. A specialist reviews the licensing revenue records, identifies the revenue attributable to your authored titles, applies the contractual royalty rate, and calculates the total unpaid amount including any applicable interest. How long does that take? Serena asked. 6 to 8 weeks, James said. And Serena, before we proceed, I want to be clear. Depending on how successful your content has been, this number could be significant. Serena thought about 47 titles, 19 countries, 9 years of licensing revenue that had grown the company's recurring income from $4 million to $38 million annually. She thought about 4 consecutive years of being told there was no budget. Commission the audit, she said. Now, if you believe that the most overlooked documents are always the ones that matter most, subscribe to Tangled Stories. I am Brett. Around here, page 4 always gets read eventually. The forensic audit took 7 weeks. The specialist, a financial analyst named Patricia Holt who worked exclusively on intellectual property and licensing disputes, reviewed 9 years of Vantage's licensing records. She cross-referenced every licensing agreement against Serena's authored title list. She applied the 3.5% royalty rate to the net licensing revenue attributable to each title. She calculated the unpaid quarterly amounts going back to year 1. She applied the contractual interest rate for late payment specified in the agreement. Her report was 42 pages. The number on page 1 was the number that mattered. Unpaid royalties including contractual interest on overdue quarterly payments. $40.3 million. James called Serena when the report came in. The number is $40.3 million, he said. Serena was quiet for a moment. Is that enforceable? She asked. Every dollar of it, James said. The clause is clear. The revenue is documented. The breach is 9 years of non-payment on a contractual obligation. We have the agreement, the audit, and the interest calculation. This is as clean a breach of contract case as I have seen in 12 years. What do you want to do? He asked. Serena thought about the 4th raised denial. About being told Vantage could not afford to pay her more while the library she had built generated $38 million a year in recurring revenue. Send them the audit, she said. James sent Vantage's general counsel, David Mercer, a letter on a Monday morning. 4 pages. It outlined the royalty clause, the 9-year breach, the forensic audit methodology, and the total unpaid amount including interest. It requested a response within 15 business days. It included the full 42-page audit report as an attachment. David Mercer received the letter at 9:14 in the morning. He had pulled Serena's original employment agreement from the archive by 9:45. He had found page 4 by 9:47. He had read the clause 3 times by 9:50. He called the CFO, Raymond Park, at 9:51. Raymond, he said, I need you to come to my office, now. Raymond arrived and read the clause. Then he read the audit summary. Then he said one word. How? David explained. The original HR director had retired. Legal had turned over. Finance had never been notified of the clause. Nobody had set up the royalty tracking system because nobody knew it was required. Raymond looked at the audit number. $40.3 million, he said. David nodded. Raymond sat down. How is our licensing revenue? He asked. $38 million annually, David said. Raymond closed his eyes briefly. So we owe her more than a full year of our entire licensing revenue, he said. David did not answer, because the answer was yes. The CEO, Marcus Webb, was informed that afternoon. Marcus had joined Vantage 4 years earlier. He had not been present when the original employment agreement was signed. He had not known the clause existed. He called an emergency meeting with David, Raymond, and outside counsel. Outside counsel reviewed the audit and the employment agreement and delivered their assessment clearly. The clause is enforceable. The breach is documented. 9 years of non-payment on a clear contractual obligation with a signed agreement, a forensic audit, and a documented instance of the clause being raised internally and not acted upon. They are referring to year 3 when Serena's manager failed to follow up. That last point is significant, outside counsel said. It establishes that Vantage had constructive notice of the obligation and failed to honor it. That strengthens her position considerably. Marcus asked about the options. Outside counsel was direct. You can settle, they said. Or you can litigate and lose on a timeline that makes settling look very attractive by comparison. Marcus looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at the audit number. What does she want? Marcus asked. David said James had not specified beyond the audit amount, and the request for a response within 15 days. Marcus said to find out. David called James the following morning. We have reviewed the audit and the agreement, David said. We would like to understand what resolution looks like for your client. James called Serena. They want to know what you want, he said. Serena had thought about this carefully since the audit came back. She did not want to burn the company down. The content library she had built employed dozens of people. The licensing relationship she had cultivated over 9 years supported real institutional clients who depended on the curriculum. But she also understood that $40 million in unpaid contractual obligations was not a rounding error. It was 9 years of a company benefiting from her work and telling her there was no budget to pay her fairly. She told James her terms. He delivered them to David that afternoon. 1. Full payment of the audited royalty amount, $40.3 million, structured over a payment schedule Serena was willing to negotiate given the company's cash position. 2. Immediate implementation of a royalty tracking and payment system, administered by an independent third party, ensuring quarterly royalty payments on all future licensing revenue from her authored titles for the remaining licensing period of each title. 3. A revised compensation structure reflecting market rate for her role and responsibilities, effective immediately. 4. A formal written acknowledgement from the board that the royalty clause had been a valid contractual obligation throughout her tenure and that non-payment had constituted a breach. 5. A 5-year employment agreement with defined termination protections, ensuring she could not be removed in retaliation for exercising her contractual rights. Outside counsel reviewed the terms and presented them to Marcus. Marcus looked at the payment schedule option on term 1. How long would we need? He asked. Outside counsel suggested that was a matter for negotiation. The negotiation took 3 weeks. The final agreement structured the $40.3 million payment over 4 years, with the first installment of $12 million due within 60 days of signing. All 5 terms were accepted. The royalty tracking system was implemented within 90 days, administered by an independent financial firm with quarterly reporting to Serena and her attorney. The revised compensation package reflected a salary increase of 68% over her previous base, bringing her to the actual market rate for a creative director managing a $38 million annual licensing portfolio. The board acknowledgement was 3 paragraphs. Factual. Signed by every board member. Serena signed the agreement on a Thursday afternoon. She did not celebrate. She went back to her office and started work on Title 48. Because the library was not going to build itself. Raymond Park implemented a mandatory employment agreement review process, conducted annually by an independent legal firm, to identify any clause or provision that had not been operationalized since signing. He called it, internally, the Cole Review. The HR director who had filed and forgotten Serena's original clause had long since left the company. Her replacement, upon learning what had happened, implemented a clause tracking database covering every non-standard provision in every senior employment agreement at Vantage. The first quarterly royalty payment under the new tracking system arrived in Serena's account on the first business day of the following quarter. On time. Correct to the cent, with a detailed breakdown of the licensing revenue calculations attached, the way it should have been paid for 9 years. Marcus Webb remained as CEO. He was by most accounts a decent leader who had inherited a problem he had not created and resolved it without making it worse. He did implement one personal practice after the situation was resolved. Every new senior employment agreement that crossed his desk, he read in full before signing. Every page. Every clause. Including page 4. And that, my friends, is how one creative director turned 9 years of being told there was no budget into a $40.3 million forensic audit finding, Because she read her own employment agreement on a quiet evening in year 9 and asked one precise question. Because some companies forget what they agreed to pay. And some clauses keep running whether the company remembers them or not. Serena's clause had been running for 9 years, at 3.5%, on $38 million a year, and nobody at Vantage had checked until James Okafor sent a letter on a Monday morning. If this story lit up your justice receptors, subscribe to Tangled Stories, drop a like, and share this with anyone who has ever been told there is no budget while watching the company they built generate millions. Because here, every story has a twist. And sometimes that twist has been compounding quietly on page 4 of your employment agreement for 9 years. I am Brett. And I will see you in the next one.